afternoon, everybody. Hey, this afternoon we'll give you a little bit about Team Orlando, which is probably one of the better kept secrets here in Orlando, unless you happen to be in our industry. Before I introduce myself and let the cat out of the bag, I want to ask the zinger question. How many people in the room believe there's a naval base here in town still? I see a little bit of a rigged crowd. So if you didn't already know that, yes, there is. I'm Captain Tim Hill. I'm the commander of that base and the Naval Air Warfare Center Training Systems Division. Yes, it's a mouthful even for me. Over there, where we do modeling, sim, and training acquisition for the Navy.
And my name is Angela Albin. I own Symmetry, which is a small business based here in Winter Park, and we do work in the medical simulation space.
So for those that weren't familiar with the fact that we still have a Navy base here in town, so back in the late 80s, my command moved from Baldwin Park, where the old Naval Recruit Training Center was, and is frankly a BRAC success. If you're going to lose a base in a town, having something that looks like Baldwin Park in its place is a pretty good deal, unlike I've seen in some other places. But we moved from over there to the Central Florida Research Park, just south of UCF, and became the first tenant there in the research park that's now getting pretty close to full over there. We started off with one single building, and we've grown now to a team over there of about 3,500 folks across all four services that are doing work there, both on and off the base. Because I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that about half of our base population lives off the base in UCF buildings known as the Partnership Complex over there that have been state funded and UCF run and operated over the years.
So along those lines, can you tell us how many government civilians and active duty folks you have there, just to give us an idea of the magnitude?
Yeah, sure. So as I said, in total about 3,500, and just to give you an idea of kind of what the composition of that looks like, I'll talk a little bit more about my own command, the Navy element over there. So we're the biggest unit over there. We've got about 1,600 people in-house today. Of that, about 1,300 are government civilians, permanent government civilian workforce. About half of that is engineers. So of some flavor of another, so everything from aerospace engineers to systems engineers to industrial engineers, we've got a little bit of all that. The rest kind of range across the gamut from logisticians to finance folks and contracting officers, and even facilities folks that help us out with maintaining the facilities and bettering those along the way. Again, for my command, about 35 active duty military. With the exception of about 3 or 4 of us, most of those active duty military are coming straight from operational duty with no acquisition background whatsoever, and coming in basically as subject matter experts to advise our workforce that doesn't always have experience with the Navy fleet in the operational environment. But if they do, it's at least dated, because we do have a lot of retirees working in the workforce. And then the balance of that 1,600 are made up of support contractors that we use to help ebb and flow our skill sets there in-house, where we might not have the right bench depth on a certain thing.
And so tell us about those skill sets, because I want to know too.
So the skill sets range all across the gamut. As I mentioned, kind of engineers, computer scientists, but what do they do? Is probably the biggest thing. So a lot of that has to do with bringing in a pretty good chunk of money every year and putting it on contract, a lot of which stays here in the local area. So the last few years we've come just shy of 1.6 billion, that's billion with a B, of money that has come in and become new orders on contract to our industry partners here in town. And a good chunk of that workforce is working with our industry partners to make that happen. So the contracting officers, the financial management folks, the program managers, and then the engineers that are evaluating those proposals and helping to manage those projects as they go on. Because just like anybody does in any business, there's a customer and there's a provider. In this case, as a customer, we tend to be pretty demanding customers and want to monitor the progress of the product all the way along, because they're generally speaking pretty expensive, complex products. So we don't want to just trust that they're going to spit out the other side. The other part of that skill set, though, is a research component of work that we do in-house. And we'll produce limited quantity things ourselves in-house. And so there we have computer scientists that are making games just like the folks over here at FIA or downtown here at GameSpace are doing, because we use a lot of that same gaming technology to do serious training for the forces out there today. We have folks that are experts in artificial intelligence. We have folks that are experts in data analytics. You kind of name it in terms of emerging tech, and we've got some amount of footprint there in that space.
And so if you can imagine, do you all know where the Central Florida Research Park is and how close it is to where we are? A lot, yes, of course, a lot of you I know. But because of that, and because of that kind of magnitude in terms of potential business, there are about 130 businesses in the area that are focused on trying to do that kind of work with the different armed services. And my small business is just one of those. I'm a UCF grad, and I started my business knowing that I could find business here doing business with the Department of Defense. Have been successful doing that, and now transitioning some of that technology and commercializing it and selling it to the civilian sector. Mr. Connors here, retired Lieutenant Colonel Connors. Sorry. I just demoted him. Anyway, so Pat, which is how I know him, he works with Advent Health, and Advent Health has purchased some of our products. The technology came directly out of the DoD. The development of those things came out of DoD needs and requirements. We developed those, provided them to the DoD, but now selling them to a hospital system, not just here, but throughout the country. So that's an example of some of the opportunity for entrepreneurs and even large companies. We have, gosh, all of the bigs are here. Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and all of those companies are here as well. So I'm supposed to ask you, no, I'm kidding. I want you to talk about Team Orlando and Team Orlando's mission, because that's something that those of us that work in the space know and appreciate that. But in my case, I've been telling you, I've been trying to do more business in San Antonio, and that does not exist in other parts of the government or in other cities.
Yeah, so good point. Team Orlando is pretty unique. And first of all, let me tell you what Team Orlando is. It's the name we've given to all four services, industry, and academia all collaborating together here in town towards our common mission. And our common mission tends to be thought of as the modeling and simulation technology that we push out to the fleet. But the better way to think about it in all reality is that technology is a tool. That technology is a tool to make the warfighters that are out there better at their art. So I'm an aviator by trade. Simulation was in my DNA from the day one of flight school. You hopped in the simulator and you did things in the simulator before you did it in the airplane. You did things in the simulator that you couldn't do in the airplane or kind of didn't want to do in the airplane because of the risk associated with it and such. And so at the end of the day, we're trying to make sure that the things that our warfighters are going to see out there in the operational environment, they don't see it for the first time in that environment. They can see it in a simulated environment with the right kind of training to make the right kind of decision. So in short, we make the warfighters better and ready to go do our nation's bidding out there. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you again, repeat that number for the direct number of contract awards, or that dollar number. What was that? Yeah, so the number I used a minute ago was just for my command, which is just shy of $1.6 billion. Across all the commands, we award somewhere between $4 and $5 billion a year. Yes, it's billion with a B. It's a big number that's out there. And just to give you an idea, too, a lot of what we do in the research park and a lot of what we ask for are things that are very well suited to small business. We'll talk more about that in a second. But, you know, the $1.6 billion that we put out on contract was about 1,350 individual contract actions out there. So kind of do some math in public, the average number of those, the average dollar value on any one of those contract actions is somewhat small and gives you an idea that there's a lot of, there's a big pie for everybody to get a piece of out there. So Captain Hill can't speak about the indirect impact, economic impact, but I can, and and I will. So I spoke with George Charos, who's the president and CEO of the National Center for Simulation, and the latest figure for the impact, the indirect impact, is $11.6 billion a year to our region. And so that means the dry cleaner that's getting his, you know, getting your suit dry cleaned, he's seeing a piece of that 1.6 or really $6 billion that comes from all of the active or the DoD services. So that's important. That's a big piece of what we do. The other thing that's interesting about that,
not only that there's 130 businesses that have formed and stayed here, and many others that are looking to come here and start their operations here, but the average salary of the people that we employ, both in the DoD positions that he described and those in our companies, is about $80,000 a year. And if you compare that to the type of wages that we're seeing throughout the rest of the region, that's a significant difference. And that is actually something that's quite attractive, and that we need to start pursuing growing more, because it is something that's going to help us do far more here in this community.
And fundamentally, the part I can talk about is that it's growing. What our need is growing, and so that's a good thing, I think.
Yeah, and those figures that I cited are figures that George gets through the different economic studies that are done, I guess, throughout the state, right? Those are funded through the state. And if you ever want to know more about that kind of stuff, George is a great person and has good data, always updated. Tell us about some of the new stuff that you've been talking about that's really interesting to me. So our company does a lot of research and development work where we're funded by the DoD to do that. And like I said, then we can eventually transition that technology and commercialize it. But there are new opportunities in R&D that primarily the Navy has announced recently that I'd like you to talk about.
Yeah, so my fellow service components that are in the room as well will know that in this day and age, we've had a challenge inside of DoD to get faster and innovate out there. Each one of the services, and frankly, DoD as an entity of its own, has had its own way of going out there and trying to rise to that challenge. In some cases, they've gone to, in a lot of cases, they've gone to the places where they think innovation is. And where are those places? They go to the Bay Area, out in Silicon Valley. They go out to Austin or Boston, and they plant an office out there to try to start reeling in some of that innovation. The Navy took a little bit of a different approach to this. It took us a little longer to come up with a solid strategy for it, but our strategy's been very different than that. So under a moniker called Naval X, because X sounds cool when you use it for acceleration and all that, we've done an initiative called the Tech Bridges. And tech bridges are basically where they've gone out and they've looked in the Navy, where is innovation already happening? So not trying to set an office up where innovation's happening in the civilian world, where is it already happening in the military? And so back in September, as we were all getting ready for Hurricane Dorian, that fortunately never came to this part of Florida, our secretariat up in D.C. had a press conference and announced 5 tech bridges, of which our command was one. So Orlando got recognized as one of those tech bridges. I'll talk a little bit in a second about what that means. But the other and probably more distinctive part of that is that 2 of those 5 were recognized as in sustainment, i.e. they have a mature ecosystem of innovation in place and working. We were one of those 2. I thought that was pretty cool because it recognizes the fact outside of Orlando that what we're doing here in Central Florida is working to help innovate, in our case, for training systems and human performance out there. And so what are those tech bridges supposed to do? So first and foremost, they're supposed to keep doing what we're already doing in terms of the collaboration that we have here in town. We're supposed to expand that. One of the things that I think is exciting about that is we're specifically chartered to kind of get outside of our lane a little bit. So we've done a really good job of collaborating in the modeling systems and training space, in the human performance space. But companies, look back here at Jason from Luminar. Companies like his, they don't play in our area, so we kind of haven't really had a lot of collaboration with them. Things like Chester Kennedy down at Bridge, that again isn't in our space. We haven't had a lot of collaboration there. We've talked, we know each other, and we're friendly, but we haven't done any work together. Under Tech Bridge, the neat thing the Navy's doing is saying those 5 and the next 5 and the next 5, as we create this larger collection of ecosystems, are charged to collaborate with each other and spread the word. And so now we have a mandate to take other things that we know that are going on here in Central Florida, like Jason's work over at Luminar, like Chester's work down at Bridge, and all the other good stuff that's happening here in town, and spread the word about that through the Navy to the folks that we know have a need for it. That's pretty big news, I think. The other thing is now we've got people at very high levels of the Navy, pretty much the highest levels as far as acquisition goes, looking at us to say, hey, what are you doing in terms of tech transition? And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but what are you doing in terms of that? What are you doing in terms of collaboration with your industry partners, with your academic partners and such, to innovate and move faster and deliver more capability to the fleet quicker? So those are some pretty interesting developments for us here very recently.
And to companies like ours, it's very interesting because it's also for the OTAs, we should talk about that. The DoD is starting to try to streamline, the acquisition of technology and innovation and the process to be able to buy technology and to do it quicker instead of it taking 3 and 4 and 5 years. They've set up new contract vehicles that allow non-traditional companies. So my company is now considered traditional because we have a cost accounting. We do business with the Department of Defense, but those that haven't done it yet and do have something to offer, and it's something that's of interest to the DoD, there are now contract vehicles that allow you to more quickly propose that and for them to access you without having to go through all of the strict protocols and things like that, the regulation that's required.
Yeah, so traditionally when you do a contract with the DoD, we do it against what's called the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and it's multiple volumes of books that are that kind of thick. So it's a lot of regulation. It makes it really hard to do business with us, as Angela said. And such. And we recognize that especially the small, innovative companies, a lot of the folks that we're talking about all day here today, just can't do that. They're not. There's too much overhead in that for them to do that, and frankly, to be as innovative as they can be. And so what we've done, and frankly, it wasn't the DoD that did this. Congress gave us some help. They expanded some authorities that already existed in the law and allowed us to use some vehicles that existed out there in different ways. So this vehicle called an Other Transaction Authority is something that allows us to acquire things outside of that federal acquisition regulation. And when you talk about what that means, the requests for proposals for that usually are like a page instead of 30 pages and 50 pages or maybe even 100 pages and such. The response or the proposals themselves come back and are measured in under 10 pages. And we have a very streamlined, instead of years award process, something measured in days, weeks, or months on the outside. And some of these have been very big. Some of them that the Army has done here locally have been in the hundreds of millions of dollars of awards. So fairly big things. We're not just talking about a $10,000 award, although it could be. And so it's a matter of trying to harness the innovation that's out there that we absolutely understand is led by industry now. Whereas in the days of the Cold War and earlier than that, defense would lead a lot of innovation, and then it would transfer out to industry for commercialization. In a lot of cases now, it's the other way around. These things are led by industry. We didn't develop these for DoD. There's plenty of things that we did develop. So, here, looking at Neil in the back of the room that used to be with the Army Research Lab component here, HoloLens that is coming out and having a wide impact was originally a product that their team worked through the Army to develop and has transitioned out commercially and such going out there. So we recognize there's a difference in the equation now, and we want to go work to harness that difference in the equation.
So that's a good news story for our community because we have a lot going on downtown and other parts of the city where there are lots of small companies, entrepreneurs that are quote-unquote non-traditional DoD companies that can start doing business with the DoD and can help grow the technology base for the DoD while also growing their business.
Yeah, and one of the things we're looking at going forward here, particularly for us as we come into this tech bridge era, I'll call it, is that, as I mentioned, technology transfer is something that's been a mandate for us for a while. Basically the law says that DoD develops something to the degree we can, we shall make sure, and that gets transitioned out to industry. Sometimes we can't because it's classified technology that we don't want to let out and such, but a lot of things we can. And so, for instance, I mentioned we've got a data analytics group in our house over there. We've got some guys that are world class at data analytics, and we develop tools of our own to use on aircraft maintenance and trying to get predictive about that and that sort of thing. Those tools can be transitioned. So one of the things we've been talking a lot with Carol Ann and Rob, that if you saw the Innovation District's presentation earlier today, is how about we offer some of that technology to some of these students that have an entrepreneurial spirit and are looking to incubate that and grow it into a commercial technology. Again, a win-win for everybody involved. As again part of our partnership with the university and others around town. Hey, so one thing I think is important that we've got on our list for me to pimp you about, Angela, is if you're a small business owner or trying to start up a small business here or anywhere for that matter, what makes you want to? Why is it a good idea to look at the government as a potential customer compared to others?
So in my case, I'm not a big risk taker, and I also like to be in charge. So unlike others that are braver, I did not want outside investment in my company. I wanted to grow the company myself organically, and I wanted my life to be within my control, right? So the Department of Defense pays on time. So to me, that's number one. Cash is king, right? And they do what they say they're going to do in the contract that you sign with them, as long as you do what you say you're going to do, which is not a problem. So for me, that was really appealing. I came back from college to work in Central Florida in Research Park in the simulation space as an engineer. So I was very familiar with working with the government. I'm a pretty black and white kind of brain, and so for me, it's always been a culture that I could assimilate into very easily. At the same time, at the time that Medical City was starting to grow legs in Central Florida, I saw the opportunity to start an R&D business where we would pursue R&D contracts and small business innovative research grants to get DoD to fund my research and development to create intellectual property that I owned. They have some rights to, but I own, and I can take it, run with it, and commercialize it. I thought that's a win-win. I don't have to have an investor. Yeah, they can tell me what to do for a couple of years, but not that long, you know. And really, it's actually been a great opportunity for me to grow and learn from a lot of people because it affords me access to a wider aperture than if I had been doing it on my own. I get access to all sorts of different folks in the healthcare industry from the DoD side to learn about whatever it is that we're trying to develop. And it has helped us, like I say, grow pretty much our intellectual property base, which is huge for a small business owner. And it's something that, you know, I'm very grateful for that ability to do that. But for me, it was really about low risk. The other thing, too, is that I'd seen other companies do similar things. Whether my exit is to sell the company or whether it's to continue to grow it, I can still continue to do work in this space. Some of my colleagues, I have colleagues that have done both, stayed with their business over 20 years, others that are selling and doing really well doing new things. And so it just provided me a little bit more flexibility to really grow and figure out what I wanted to do.
Yeah, it's interesting as a perspective because what I think we find is we go out and, you know, this room was atypical when we took the poll about who knew about the Navy base being in town, right? Because we got a bunch of plants in here for one that know that. But typically, and I'll you know, my experience 3 years ago when I got into town and went through the Leadership Orlando course, 85 folks in the room, and we did the same poll, and there were three of us who happened to be in the industry that knew the base was here, that knew that this is, you know, the epicenter for the world for modeling and simulation and training for DoD and really writ large out there, and so we've been a bit of a secret for a while, and that has kept more folks like Angela from looking at us as a potential customer out there. And frankly, with the call to innovate and our need to do so, we need more people to look this way and at least consider it. It's not going to be for everybody because not everybody's going to have that same mindset that you had. But we need a bigger base than what we have today.
And also, I should say, you don't always have to be the prime contractor. So you don't have to follow all those strict guidelines and things in all cases. You can also be a subcontractor. And there are many companies that choose not to implement the, you know, cost accounting guidelines and all the rules that we have to follow and timekeeping and all these things that we have to do. And they do very well just being a subcontractor and doing it on a firm fixed price basis and not being audited. And so there's an opportunity there as well. And like we talked about that indirect economic impact, I currently work with a lot of incubator companies that support my company but aren't necessarily selling anything that the DoD would want. So someone that maybe wants to help you with your brand, someone that, you know, those kinds of companies also find a lot of work in Central Florida Research Park and surrounding that area, supporting the 130 companies that I mentioned. The other thing too, because I forgot to mention earlier, is that well, at least for me, this is one of the best cities to start a business because I think there's so many different organizations that are looking at diversifying our economy and offer so many resources to us as entrepreneurs to start a business. The SBA has a presence here, the Small Business Development Center, now the way that we're retooling the Orlando Chamber of Commerce, and then all the other chambers of commerce and what they're doing, and not to mention UCF, the world's greatest university, right? I mean, UCF has the incubator, and if you want to start a business in Central Florida and you go to an incubator, you will be successful. If you've got the drive and you have a decent idea, and even if you don't start off with a decent idea, they'll help you find the right idea. And they can surround you with a bunch of people, typically at the beginning for free. So that was another thing that appealed to me. I could have all the independence that I wanted to raise my kids, and that be my primary role, but also do something that I was passionate about.
Hey, I'm going to go off script a little bit and give an example, tell a little story here about what collaboration with non-traditionals does for us and for your military out there. So about 10 years ago, our command built a product up at Great Lakes, Illinois, that's called Battle Stations 21. And I'd encourage you to go Google that at some point, and look at the YouTube video that's about that. CNN did a story on it that's pretty amazing. So in about 3 minutes, you can capture what this thing's all about. But I'll do my best with words to tell you that. So imagine a 9/10 scale recreation of a warship, a destroyer. So a warship that's usually somewhere around 400 feet long out in the field. So 9/10 scale, so this thing's big. Inside a building, sitting in 90,000 gallons of water. But the backside of the ship, because you're seeing the front side and it looks like a ship, the backside is over 100,000 square foot of training space inside. And sailors come into this after being sleep deprived for a whole day at around 10 o'clock at night. And they get underway, air quotes, on board this ship in this building for a trip that's supposed to take them from Norfolk, Virginia, up the James River to Yorktown to pick up some cargo, come back from Yorktown, and go back to Norfolk with this cargo they picked up. So they get on board. As they've come through, everything looks like a ship, it smells like a ship, it sounds like a ship, and such. They go through and they do some basic line handling drills and that sort of thing to get the ship underway. And then get to Yorktown, load this cargo on the ship, get back underway again, head to Norfolk, and all of a sudden the worst thing happens ever, and they get attacked in the James River on their way back from Yorktown to Norfolk, and they have the worst night of their lives. And this ship has suddenly, transformed into hell for them because they find themselves fighting fires, live fires inside this, fighting real floods, trying to go through problems to drag stranded shipmates out of their bunks that have been twisted and torn up by simulated bombs and such. And they've gone through this. They come out at the end of this event having successfully gotten back to Norfolk, in theory. And they get on the pier, and that's their crucible event from boot camp, the very last thing they do to become Navy sailors. At the end of this experience, they drop down American flags. They have Lee Greenwood playing, as you might imagine. Tears start flowing, and they get their cap that they've been wearing for the last several weeks that says recruit on it replaced with one that says Navy. And they're now a U.S. Navy sailor, and they've made that achievement at that point. The only thing they have left to do is march in a parade to formally graduate. So what caused that to work the way it does, to the point that those men and women, that are about to go serve their country out, underway somewhere around the world, they're crying because they've gotten through this stressful event. Well, it was because we managed to get the suspension of disbelief in place. And so the way we did that was collaborating here locally with the entertainment industry. And so just like when you walk in to pick your favorite ride at your favorite theme park on the other side of town, you walk in that deck and it's a concrete floor much like this, but it's got simulated bird droppings on it and oil spills and the kinds of things you would see on the deck of the pier in Norfolk. The buildings look just like when you walk into the theme parks, just like the buildings in Norfolk look. When they turn into Yorktown, those facades have been rotated around and they look like Yorktown. You walk into the ship and everything looks and smells the way it's supposed to. It sounds the way it's supposed to. Even to a guy that walked onto it for the first time ever with 20 years of service and 4 deployments on carriers, it looked like the right thing to me the first time I walked on board it and stuff. And so it certainly looked that way to first-timers out there, and they believed they were in that moment. And that's what we took away from the theme park industry out here that does that on a daily basis for thousands and thousands of people that come to visit us here. But what else did we take away? Some of the folks downstairs were talking about it earlier. If you were in the Innovation District's pitch earlier, how often does Space Mountain run? How often does the Harry Potter ride run? It's running all the time. What happens when you walk into one of those parks and that ride doesn't work? You're ticked. And the theme parks don't like their guests to be ticked, right? For us, there's a different effect if something doesn't work. When you're talking about boot camp and it's a machine that just is there it's a production line basically. And so when that trainer doesn't work, you kink up that whole train and now you've depleted the fleet of a round of sailors that they're supposed to get. So we now have a device that will run 50 weeks a year, 7 days a week. It comes down for 2 weeks right around Christmas every year for a modification and upgrade, and it works all the time. And that's something else we took away from the theme parks. And you never would have thought that the military simulation industry and the theme parks would collaborate, but that's the kind of thing that happens when you put these apparently disparate things together and get a good product out of it. So that's really the magic of what's happening here in Central Florida with our Team Orlando concept.
And that partnership between the university and industry and government is so beneficial. Another reason why I also chose to start my business here too. Okay, so I'm going to give some of these, but I want to ask you first some examples of dual-use technology. We talked about that, the HoloLens, but there are other examples where the DoD's invested in certain capabilities that they wanted for a specific purpose that have lent themselves for the civilian market.
Yeah, so like laser tag is a great example. I think a lot of us have played that over time. That started out as technology for the Army and Marine Corps to use out on the range for instead of using live fire, they can actually tell when someone's been hit, same way as you do when you go play that as a game. There's a game that I believe you'll find at some of the arcades here in town that is basically what we would use as a parachute descent trainer. So when we have the worst day of our career and have to bail out of an aircraft, and we need to learn how to do that, and we do that in virtual reality and such. That has been commercialized and is now a game in different arcades you'll find around town here with one of the local companies, Sortec, and that was an R&D project that we did with them. You got some more?
Yeah, and in my case, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with human patient simulators, but they're basically a mannequin that has electronics on board as well as software that makes that mannequin behave like a human and has a physiology model, so it simulates their heart rate and all of their different vital signs depending on their age, weight, and whatever condition they might have encountered. And there have been two specific human patient simulators that were started out of Neil's old organization, which is, I don't know what it's called now. Back then was called the Army Research Lab, I think. But that group needed to figure out, well, actually, I'll go back. The military realized during Desert Storm and those more recent engagements that by teaching their warfighter how to put on a tourniquet, when someone had a severe injury and was bleeding, they could hemorrhage and die, which is what happened more in Vietnam than it did during Desert Storm. We were actually putting in their uniforms, they each had a BDU, not a BDU, in their uniforms they each had a tourniquet that they would take out and could put on themselves if they had to or on someone else. When that kind of stuff started coming back from theater, the DoD started investing in more higher fidelity mannequins, higher fidelity patient simulators that could simulate not just that condition, but others that were also requiring some critical skills in order to save that life. And as a result, those two mannequins have been sold around the world and being used in training today, not just in the DoD or for other militaries across the world, but also in the civilian space. I hate to mention Pulse, but if you guys remember how quickly our emergency management personnel were able to go in and pull out and save so many lives during that. And that's because the hospital systems currently do this as a part of their training. I know that Advent Health has a massive medical training program throughout their organization where they're constantly training not just that type of incident, but other things like MRSA or even the what's the one where people came back? Ebola. So for Ebola, there's a lot of training that's done with those types of mannequins. And that kind of stuff happens based out of technology that's developed here by other companies like mine that are looking for work with the DoD. And other things that also happen, like with cybersecurity, we've talked about prosthetics, things that indirectly affect the civilian marketplace and the civilian world that are funded by the DoD. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we're down to just a few minutes left, so try to wrap up with a couple of thoughts about what we're trying to do, and then leave some time for questions. So, number one, as I mentioned earlier, we're in this near peer threat environment that exists out there. You don't have to go too far through the news on a daily basis to realize that the world's a dangerous place. From a Navy perspective, 90+% of the world's trade comes across the sea. 99% of the world's telecommunications happens under the sea. So that satellite stuff does, less than 1% out there. So, you want your Navy out there protecting those seas and keeping things open. Regardless of who you are, what your political beliefs are, I think you'll agree that the world's a better place when we hold an edge over the competition as a country because of what we do to try to proliferate our lifestyle and our beliefs around the world. We recognize that when we're in a peer/near peer threat world, that our way to stay ahead and keep that edge is to innovate. It's been the American fighting spirit all the way back to the Revolutionary War that has been our edge over superior odds and such. And so to keep that, we've got to harness that innovation. And so I think we've talked a little bit about what we're doing, in terms of trying to go fast, trying to make it easier to do business with the government, trying to harness the innovation and do cooperative things. But frankly, if you're a small business owner or an innovator and you haven't thought about working with the government, please do. If you know somebody who's in that category and hasn't thought about looking at us, please ask them to. As Angela said, we've got people out there that are ready, willing, and able to help and come alongside of you to help you through that process and such. And that doesn't mean we have to be your only customer. We just need to be one of them if it's the right fit. And so that's the pitch, for us and what our need is there. It's to protect this way of life that we all have and make our contribution to making our men and women out there that are doing it safer and better at it when they're out there.
And one last plug for this Team Orlando thing. It is so unique that they have, within his command, he has one person dedicated just to making sure that anyone that has a question, anyone that has an inquiry, can be connected with the right folks, can find the right resources. And that's just the one service. Each of the services has the same person in that role, right?
Yeah, and she's sitting right back there. That's why
there
she
is.
had
She's
Diana Teal
on
back there.
Facebook right now, probably.
She's tweeting about this, I'm sure.
But that's an amazing thing, and I did mention it earlier. So the military, 50% of what they do in the medical space is done out of San Antonio. And so I've gone to San Antonio and been going to San Antonio a lot, and it is not as receptive. It is not as friendly as it is here, where you've got, Captain Hill, General Sloan, they all sit on a board with the university, with National Center for Simulation, with the Orlando Executive Partnership, and they all talk and collaborate about how to get more businesses to come and work with them. And they're actively working to make that possible. So I think if you're at all interested or curious, to please reach out. Diana's over there. Please reach out to them or reach out to any of us. George is a great conduit as well. If you're a business owner or if you're in a business that might be interested or might have something that's relevant to share with the Department of Defense, there's so many people that can help guide you in that way. And this is a community where you would more easily be able to do that, I think, than anywhere else.
We got any questions?
I have a question. So when you talk about like peer and near peer, as far as like asset infrastructure, they have fighter jets that are similar, missiles similar. How is it on the other side when it comes to actual like simulation and training? Is that close to the American push, or is it still like?
So the question is, when we talk about peers and near peers, certainly the technology is similar, but how is their training? And frankly, that's our edge still. So the couple of things out there that still give us an edge today is that typically when we build something that's high quality and reliable. That is not necessarily true of our near peers and peers out there. And then typically when we put a fleshy substance next to that thing, one of us to go fly it or operate it, we're more trained than they are. That is changing rapidly because, in this global economy, their resources are approaching similar status to ours. So their ability to put people in to get more flying hours, more steaming time is getting better. But there's a learning curve that we went up back in the 40s and 50s in doing things at scale that they still have to experience. Doesn't mean they won't. And so our only way to stay ahead of that is to continue to keep, innovating further. So thanks for that.
Sorry if I missed this in an early session, but is there a collaboration possibly with UCF, for example, of the young people who may choose UCF versus going out of our community to learn simulation or development of those sorts of things? Do they need to get in the armed services, or are there opportunities in this?
So I'm not a UCF representative, so if I make a mistake, Maritza, please correct me. But University of Central Florida has the Institute for Simulation Training. And that organization, first of all, offers internships to any UCF student, and I think even possibly high school students. Not to mention that we even have a statewide program to get kids certified from the high school age as interns in simulation training so they can come work at companies like ours or even at the commands. I'm not sure if you guys are still doing the co-op that you've done. I know I have a lot of colleagues that work for you or for the Army that went to UCF and co-opted at one of the commands. And then we also have the only PhD, right, and master's in modeling, simulation, and training. So the state of Florida is actively making sure that we try to not only grow the talent, but retain the talent here too.
Yeah, that's absolutely. In fact, I'd say that at least for my service, I think it's less true for the Air Force and the Army because they have some uniform-wearing folks that can get into that stuff while they're still serving. But if you're interested in getting into the modeling and simulation portion, you're actually better off not putting a uniform on at that point. I'm a user of modeling and sim for most of my career, not an acquirer of. That's only been in the last few years. And such. So definitely, like Angela said, I think it's something, the last time I took a count with our human resources team, something just short of 50% of the folks and the civilians in our command have some sort of affiliation with UCF, whether it was undergraduate or graduate level education.
And there are other regions, so you know, that are competing and actively calling companies like mine asking us to relocate. So there is competition for this because there is a lot of really good work that's available in the technology space that they afford us. So, any other questions?
Well, cool. I think we're pretty close on time anyway. Awesome. Awesome.
Diana's right there. She's right there. And the Army has a Randy who's, and I can't remember who took over Tara's position. Yeah. And Leslie. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So Diane asked me to chat for a second about the TOIL, the Team Orlando Integration Lab. Great name, right?
They have very good acronyms.
Yeah, as in the most recent acquisitions of space, Partnership Buildings 4 and 5, one of the neat things about Partnership 4, which is only a couple of doors down from the base, is that it has a high bay area in it. And so if you don't know what that means, it's about 2 times the size of the ceiling space in here, which makes it really great for research and development kind of work. We intend to take a chunk of that and make it what is known as a Team Orlando Integration Lab, which will be an area that we will jointly run across Team Orlando, the services and the university, and look to use and work with industry in that space, off base where we have good access and such, but being able to connect via networks and stuff back to the base to reduce risk on projects that we develop together. And such. So we're pretty excited about that coming online first part of next year.
And there's a model like that at MacDill for SOCOM where they have even stricter issues with security. So those types of models are popping up more and more. That's exciting for us to have that here and that access. because again, it allows non-traditional companies to be able to start working and exploring working with the DoD to grow their companies in the